A chilly October morning in 2021 began with an unusual disturbance on Pinebrook Drive in Jackson, Mississippi. 6 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a small single-story house in the middle of a quiet residential neighborhood. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as officers in tactical gear silently took positions around the property, sealing off all entrances and exits like a long-planned operation. Inside, 46-year-old David Holloway was making his morning coffee, a routine he had followed for more than 2 decades as a polite financial advisor, a model neighbor, and a regular churchgoer at the local congregation. At exactly 7:32 a.m., a sharp knock echoed through the house. "David Holloway, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 2010 disappearance of Daniel Kellar." Officers later described how his hand trembled slightly as he set down the coffee mug, yet his face remained unnervingly calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment for the past 11 years. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss the latest cases. Autumn 2010 in Oxford, Mississippi, carried the familiar quiet charm of a small southern town, narrow streets shaded by ancient oaks, the red brick church in the town square still ringing its bells every afternoon, and residents, mostly multi-generational families, clinging to old habits like unchanging rituals. Life here moved slowly, quietly, peacefully, and privately. In the middle of that rhythm was Daniel Kellar, 38 years old, a familiar and respected face in the community. He managed North Delta funeral services, a job the whole town agreed took a special kind of kindness. Danny was gentle, meticulous, never forgot the name of the deceased, and was often the one singing at their final farewells. He lived alone in a small house on the south side of town, had few close friends, and most people who knew him connected through work, church, or the funerals he arranged. Among the few people Danny regularly visited was 74-year-old Margaret Maggie Holloway, the widow of a former landowner. After her husband's death, she had almost completely withdrawn from the world, living in seclusion inside a large wooden house on the edge of Oxford, isolated behind a row of trees and an always closed iron gate. People said she was difficult, sometimes harsh, yet Danny still came by to help with small chores. Grocery runs, fixing the water heater, replanting the roses in her backyard. On a Monday afternoon, neighbors saw him leave the funeral home in his work clothes and drive his silver Ford Focus toward Old Taylor Road, the road that led to Mrs. Holloway's house. No one thought anything of it. Stopping by her place had become routine. Night fell, the porch light at the Holloway house came on, and it stayed on all night. Passers-by noticed Danny's car parked on the grass beside the gate and assumed he had stayed over. The next morning, he didn't show up for work, didn't answer his phone, and his voicemail only returned a beep. His family called repeatedly and even went to his house, but he was gone. By mid-morning, they walked into the Oxford Police Department and filed a report. Daniel Kellar was missing. The report was logged mid-morning, just as the first sunlight filtered through the trees beside City Hall. Police Chief Don Haskell took the call from the front desk, stepped out of a briefing, and read the file. A man like Kellar, steady job, no debt, no criminal record, vanishing overnight, without a word, was almost unheard of in Oxford. Haskell decided not to wait. He dispatched the rapid response team to the last known location provided by the family, the wooden house on the outskirts belonging to Margaret Holloway. 3 patrol cars left the station within 15 minutes, rolling through the sleepy downtown with its roadside shops and faded gas station billboards. The narrow asphalt road to the Holloway house was shrouded in mist, oppressively quiet. When the team arrived, the iron gate was closed, its black paint chipped from the night dew. Danny's silver Ford Focus was parked right outside, dry, with no signs of collision or movement. Haskell stepped out, scanned the yard, and noted no strange tire tracks, no debris. One officer recorded coordinates and photographed the car's position. 2 others approached the door and called for the homeowner. It took nearly a minute before slow footsteps were heard inside, the lock turned softly, and Miss Holloway appeared in a pale gray robe, her face expressionless, eyes blurred from lack of sleep or age. When Haskell explained why they were there, she simply nodded and said Danny had stopped by the previous evening to check her water heater, then left, saying he was heading to Jackson for a few days. Her voice was steady, without hesitation or apparent worry. Haskell paid close attention to every small detail in her statement and asked a few follow-up questions, but her answers remained unchanged. He had the techs photograph the front of the house, document the gate and lock condition, then turned to the left side of the yard, where a path led down to the garage. The ground was damp, the grass undisturbed, the garage's wooden walls covered in a thin layer of dust. He wrote in his notebook, no signs of struggle or forced entry. Inside the victim's car were only a neatly folded jacket, a to-do list for the day, no phone, no wallet. An officer opened the trunk, empty. Haskell ordered close-up photos of the driver's seat area, item numbering, and the car sealed for transport back to the impound. Inside the house, he did a quick sweep. The living room was tidy, no strange odors, polished hardwood floors. Haskell asked again about the exact time Danny left. She answered vaguely. Probably around dark, I didn't check the clock. While taking her statement, he noticed her hand didn't shake, and her signature was firm. Before leaving, he had stakes placed to mark the search perimeter and instructed her to leave everything as is for the day. Back in the car, Haskell glanced through the gate one last time. Midday sun poured straight down onto the pavement, illuminating the fine dust on the silver car's hood. Everything was too quiet, too neat, and it unsettled him. Experience told him real disappearances rarely began in such silence. Still, there was no evidence yet to open a criminal file. All he could do was follow procedure, document the incident, collect data, and wait for results. Haskell returned to the station, signed the paperwork to open a new case file coded missing person, suspicious circumstances. In the notes section, he wrote a short line, vehicle located at Holloway residence, no witnesses, subject's whereabouts unknown. That same afternoon, the Oxford Police Department's forensic team was dispatched to the scene for a detailed survey. Mrs. Holloway's house sat quietly on a large lot, surrounded by old oaks and pines that cast shadows over the gravel driveway. When the tech van arrived, the sun was already tilting westward, golden light filtering through the wooden porch beams and making everything look strangely normal. In front of the gate, Danny's Ford Focus remained exactly where it had been, now surrounded by yellow police tape. Chief Haskell observed from a distance and handed the scene over to the lead forensic technician. The team started outside, measuring the property dimensions, marking GPS coordinates for the car, gate, garage, and front door. The entire layout was recorded on a master diagram, two-story main house, narrow path on the left, leading to a single-car garage, garden and old wooden fence in the back. Every external object was photographed, the wooden chair on the porch, the dried-out planters, peeling paint on the railing. No foreign objects or drag marks. Inside, wearing gloves and using evidence bags, they documented each room. The living room was tidy, with a few old newspapers on the table, a cold cup of tea, and a yellowed framed photo of Mr. and Mrs. Holloway. The air inside was cold and still. In the kitchen, technicians noticed two coffee cups side by side, one with a small amount of settled grounds at the bottom, the other drier, no steam. Next to them was a cream-colored cloth napkin with a faint light brown stain. Everything was logged on the evidence checklist: position, distance from the sink, direction of window light. After close-up photos, the items were numbered and sealed separately. C1, coffee cup 1, C2, coffee cup 2, K1, napkin. On the floor near the back door, one technician spotted a thin gray fiber stuck to the wooden threshold, slightly textured like wool from a jacket. He removed it with tweezers, placed it in a small vial labeled F1. Out back, the team examined the garage, a small attached room with gray-painted wooden walls and a metal roll-up door. No vehicle inside, just a few old tools and dried paint cans. On the concrete floor, A small patch near the wall was darker and damper than the rest, possibly from rainwater seepage or something else. They took a soil sample, labeled M1, placed it in a thick plastic bag, and recorded the date, time, technician, and exact coordinates. The entire house was scanned with a blue light source for biological traces, but nothing fluoresced. Every room was filmed with a wide-angle lens, fixed lighting and focus for future reconstruction. Haskell watched from the porch and wrote, "No signs of struggle, furniture placement stable, all items in expected positions." Once the interior was finished, they moved to the garage, photographing the full scene from 4 angles and using a laser measure for distances between the garage door and the victim's car. A scene diagram was drawn on-site, marking exact locations of the cups, napkin, fiber, and soil sample with GPS coordinates. Before leaving, the lead tech read the entire report aloud. Survey time, responsible officer, evidence list. All collected items were sealed in a preservation box and loaded into the tech van. Haskell signed off on the file, took one last look around as the late-day sun glinted off the metal garage door, highlighting the even layer of dust. Everything was silent and orderly, almost deliberately so. He closed his notebook and wrote the final line of the temporary report. Scene fully processed, no evidence of entry or violence discovered. Evidence collected and sealed for analysis. After the forensic team completed their survey, Chief Don Haskell returned to the station with the temporary file and evidence list, and began the witness statement phase. The first order of business was another interview with Margaret Holloway, the last known person to have seen Daniel Kellar on the night he vanished. She was brought in the next morning for questioning, accompanied by her private attorney even though she was not yet a suspect. She sat upright, hands clasped on the table, voice steady as she answered. She stated that Danny had arrived late afternoon, brought a few groceries, helped check the water system, and talked for about an hour. When Haskell asked about his departure time, she said around dark, but couldn't be exact, only that he drove away. "I heard the engine, and then silence." She denied any argument or unusual behavior. Haskell asked if she noticed him carrying anything. She shook her head and said he only had his little briefcase like always. When asked why his car was still at the gate the next morning, she seemed surprised and said, "I thought he had left." Haskell documented everything, noting her statement matched the initial report, but lacked specific times, especially between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. He then interviewed 2 neighbors along Old Taylor Road. The first, Sarah Boyd, said she saw Danny's car pull up just after dusk, headlights still on, but heard nothing after that. Around 8 p.m. she went into her yard and saw the Holloway porch light on and the car still parked. The second neighbor, Mr. Atkins, who lived one house down, recalled hearing a car engine start softly late at night, but wasn't sure whose, since traffic was rare. Neither saw Danny leave the house or drive away, and both confirmed they had never heard any arguing or trouble between the two. Haskell noted, no direct witnesses saw the victim leave the scene. He continued to North Delta Funeral Services to take statements from Danny's co-workers. Longtime assistant Linda Garner said, Danny left work late afternoon, mentioning he would stop by Mrs. Holloway's to help with a few things and then head home. He showed no signs of tiredness or worry, just carried a small bouquet and a grocery store bag. When he didn't show up the next morning, they assumed he was sick, but by noon, the family reported him missing. No coworker received any call, text, or email from him after that time. Haskell compared the statements and began sketching a rough timeline. 4 p.m., Danny leaves the funeral home. 5 p.m., car appears at Holloway Gate. 7 o'clock, 8 p.m., neighbors see porch light on, car still there. 11 p.m., possible engine sound, source unconfirmed. 7 a.m. next day, car still in place, no driver. From this data he flagged the critical window between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m., when the victim was inside or around the property, with no one seeing him leave. Haskell requested Mrs. Holloway's phone records, but she said she had no cell phone, only a landline. He sent an officer back to check the landline call log and address book. No incoming or outgoing calls during that time frame. The preliminary report closed with the note: no direct witness saw victim after entering Holloway residence. No evidence of departure by personal vehicle. Events between 18 o'clock, 23 o'clock remain unaccounted for. That evening in his office, Haskell reviewed every statement, laid the pages side by side, and drew pencil lines connecting the gaps of silence. 4, possibly 5 hours, when no one knew where Danny Kellar was, what he was doing, or who he was with. After compiling witness statements and scene survey results, Chief Don Haskell launched a small-scale search operation around the Old Taylor Road area. A 20-person team was formed, consisting of local police, Lafayette County Rescue Volunteers, and a state technical support unit specializing in missing persons searches in wooded and lake terrain. A map was spread across a folding table set up in Mrs. Holloway's backyard as a temporary command post. Haskell circled a 3-kilometer radius from the car's location in red marker and divided it into 4 main zones: the Western Woods roadside meadow, low ground bordering a small river, and the trail leading to Sardis Lake. Each team received walkie-talkies, flashlights, handheld GPS units, and a checklist of items to watch for. 3 tracking dogs from the Jackson unit were brought in, allowed to scent Danny's jacket and a personal cloth before being released downwind. The first hours of the search passed in near silence, broken only by footsteps and the jingle of leashes. Teams moved in a line abreast, maintaining even spacing, marking cleared areas with reflective tape. The ground was damp and muddy in places, slowing progress. Late on the first day, the dogs paused and barked briefly near the wooden fence behind the Holloway house before losing the trail. Technicians took a soil sample there and logged it, but nothing obvious was found. On day 2, the search expanded south toward the main road. A metal detector gave weak signals that turned out to be only rusted cans and old nails, all logged but unrelated. When they reached the low forest bordering the lake, the sonar team deployed to scan Sardis Lake. They used 2 high-frequency units, dividing the scan area into grid squares. The screens showed only rock and silt. No anomalous large objects. Haskell stood on the bank, watching sunlight dance on the water, and quietly told the radio, "Do one more pass." Still nothing. Over the first 6 days, the teams covered the designated area, more than 20 square miles, finding no physical traces, no clothing, no personal items, no footprints. On the 7th day, sudden rain forced a halt. The dirt roads around Old Taylor turned to mud, and pickups couldn't get through. Haskell suspended operations for 2 days for safety. When the weather cleared, only 15 exhausted searchers remained. They returned to the lake area, set up a temporary shelter as a rest station, and worked back from the waterline into the woods. A few small items were recovered: bottle caps, scraps of cloth, cigarette filters. The lab quickly ruled them unrelated. Haskell walked the dirt roads, meticulously logging each cleared sector, marking them in red spray paint on the large command post map. Zones were crossed off as completed until no significant blank spaces remained. On day 10, the teams returned to the starting point, pulled up markers, and erased temporary stakes. Every area within a 4-kilometer radius of the Holloway house had been searched at least twice. No traces, no new witnesses, no additional evidence. Haskell stood quietly in front of the iron gate, staring at the now empty yard, marked only by a few lingering boot prints in the wet soil. He wrote the final entry in the operation log. Initial search phase concluded. No signs of violence or related evidence discovered. Recommend temporary suspension pending reevaluation of investigative direction. After 10 days, all personnel were pulled back. The last strips of reflective tape came down, and Old Taylor Road returned to its previous stillness. Only the trees swaying in the wind and faint tire tracks from police vehicles left in the soft earth. With the search yielding no concrete results, Chief Don Haskell shifted focus to analyzing the victim's communication data, now the only remaining avenue that might clarify the timeline before he vanished. Daniel Kellar's cell phone had not been found at the scene, so the technical unit requested connection records and usage logs from the carrier for the 3 days prior to the disappearance. The files arrived early the following week, nearly 30 printed pages detailing timestamps and cell tower locations. Haskell and the department's tech specialist reviewed every entry. Kellar used a basic flip phone with no GPS or constant data connection like newer smartphones of the era. The system logged the final outgoing call and text from a tower covering South Oxford, the exact area that included Old Taylor Road and the Holloway house. After that moment, the device never connected again, meaning the phone was either turned off or ran out of battery shortly after he arrived. Call logs for that day showed 3 exchanges: one work-related call in the afternoon, one missed call from his sister that evening, and a final outgoing text sent just before dark: "Running late, don't wait up for dinner." The short message showed no signs of distress. Haskell had the text pull messages from the previous week, all routine about funeral scheduling and church supplies. There were no calls to Jackson as Mrs. Holloway had claimed, and no evidence he was planning to leave Oxford anytime soon. Copies of Kellar's work email were obtained from the funeral home computer, mostly scheduling and supplier correspondence. No personal emails, no out-of-area contacts, no searches for bus tickets, hotels, or travel plans. Haskell noted no data indicating victim intended to leave Oxford. He compared the timestamp of the final text with the last confirmed sighting of the car at the gate. Perfect overlap. That meant the last signal came while he was still within the property's range. The text tried to narrow the location further, but 2010-era records only showed coverage zones, not precise GPS coordinates like later devices. 3 nearby towers overlapped, producing a location error of several kilometers. Pinpointing whether the phone was inside the house or on the road was impossible. Holloway's landline records were cross-checked. Same result. No calls during the relevant window. Haskell had the full logs copied and attached to the official file. That night in his office, he spread the printouts across the desk and marked key times in red. From afternoon to evening, everything looked normal. One call, one text, strong signal, then sudden silence. No indication the victim left the area. No pings from any other tower in the following 24 hours. The only ways to go completely dark were to power the phone off deliberately or move far outside coverage, neither of which made sense in a fully covered town like Oxford. Haskell's preliminary conclusion in the report read, "Device ceased activity within the Holloway property radius. No data indicating movement away from the area. No post-disappearance contact. Detailed GPS unavailable due to 2010 technology limitations." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the wall map where red lines from the search zones converged with cell tower symbols. Every thread led to a single point: the wooden house at the end of Old Taylor Road, where all traces simply stopped, as if cut off mid-sentence. Immediately after completing the cross-verification of communication data, Haskell transferred all seized samples from the Holloway residence to the Forensic Examination Laboratory of the Mississippi State Police, located in Jackson, for forensic analysis. The evidence boxes were carefully sealed, labeled with case numbers matching the scene report: C1, C2, K1, F1, M1. He requested priority results for the 2 primary items, the coffee cup and the napkin, since these were the only objects clearly showing the presence of both individuals in the same space before Kellar went missing. The lab received them over the weekend, opened the case file following standard procedure, and checked preservation conditions before extracting samples. In the subsequent report, the examiners confirmed that the first coffee cup sample C1 contained a small amount of DNA, matching the biological profile of Daniel Kellar, obtained from his toothbrush at his private residence. The second cup, C2, carried female DNA matching samples obtained from Holloway's hair and toothbrush. The results indicated that the two had shared coffee within a time frame close to the disappearance, with no evidence of cross-contamination between the samples. No unusual oils or bodily fluids were found on the cup surfaces, and there were no traces of blood or foreign substances. The napkin, K1 yielded similar results. Epithelial cells from both individuals were detected, along with a faint light brown streak identified as dried coffee, not blood. The sample was tested with the Kastle-Meyer reaction for hemoglobin and returned a completely negative result. The report concluded, no indications of human blood or abnormal biological material. The technicians then moved on to examine the gray fabric fiber fawn collected near the back door. The fiber had a synthetic wool and polyester blend structure, fine diameter, light gray with a slight silver sheen, common in men's winter jackets. However, pinpointing an exact source was nearly impossible without a comparison sample. Spectroscopic analysis detected no distinctive dyes, making it impossible to link the fiber directly to any specific garment. The report noted, fiber material, unidentified, unable to compare. Next was the soil sample, one taken near the rear garage. Physicochemical analysis revealed red clay mixed with sand, high moisture content, signs of rainwater saturation, no unusually high iron levels, and no distinctive organic traces indicative of blood or bodily fluids. Under microscopic examination, technicians found a few root fibers and paint chips, possibly washed down from the house walls by water. The result clearly stated, no biological traces detected. Upon completion of all testing, the entire set of samples was returned to the Oxford Police Department, along with a 20-page report detailing the findings for each item. Haskell read every line carefully, lingering longest on the general conclusion, insufficient basis to establish criminal activity. The evidence confirms the presence of both individuals at the same location, but does not prove conflict or violence. He closed the file, set it on his desk, and stared at the wall map marked with red lines indicating search areas. Every trace led back to that house, yet no evidence revealed what happened after that final cup of coffee. Haskell ordered all samples stored in the department's evidence locker, resealed according to regulations, in case further testing was required. In the report sent to county headquarters, he wrote concisely, "Initial forensic examination results, no blood, signs of violence or foreign objects detected. DNA confirms presence of victim and homeowner at proximate times. Insufficient criminal elements to prosecute." He reread the full text before signing, his handwriting steady but deliberate. It was the final report of the preliminary forensic phase, a result too clean, too perfect, leaving him with a heavy feeling. Everything made sense on paper, yet between those lines of conclusion remained an unexplainable void. A man walked into an ordinary house, drank a cup of coffee, and vanished from the world without leaving a single scratch. After the forensic evidence results came back, offering no new leads, Chief Don Haskell shifted focus to the financial angle, the area he believed could most clearly reflect the relationship between Daniel Kellar and Margaret Holloway in the final weeks before his disappearance. He directed the department's Economic Investigation Unit to review all bank accounts connected to both individuals, including Kellar's personal account at First National Bank of Oxford and Holloway's accounts at Southern Credit Union. Transaction data arrived after 3 days, showing Kellar's activity in the preceding month was completely normal, regular payroll deposits, fixed expenses, no large withdrawals, no unusual transactions or out-of-state transfers. His account reflected only minor payments for groceries, gas, and one purchase of funeral supplies. There were no signs he was preparing to leave or withdrawing abnormal amounts of cash. However, when cross-referencing Holloway's accounts, Haskell noticed something significant. 3 days after Kellar was reported missing, a $40,000 cash withdrawal was made from the downtown Oxford branch. The withdrawal slip was signed Daniel Kellar in clear handwriting, closely resembling the signature on file at his bank. The transaction occurred at the teller window and was verified using Holloway's ID. She was present with the person withdrawing the money, according to the teller's internal statement. Upon reading this, Haskell immediately requested contact with the branch to verify security camera footage. Unfortunately, the bank's 2010 storage system retained video for only 7 days, and by the time he checked, it was far too late. No copies remained. He personally visited the branch manager for details. The teller that day, Janice Moore, recalled a tall man with brown hair accompanying Mrs. Holloway, but couldn't be certain of his identity, as Holloway often handled large transactions and sometimes had relatives assist with paperwork. When shown Kellar's photo, she hesitated and said, "He looks similar, but I can't be sure." Haskell noted in the record, witness unable to positively identify the individual who withdrew the funds. He ordered handwriting analysis of the signature on the withdrawal slip. The department's handwriting expert compared stroke patterns, slant, and pressure. Results showed high similarity, but could not be conclusive because the slip was completed with a common black ballpoint pen, easily imitated. The expert report concluded, signature likely produced by the same individual, but insufficient for definitive identification. Haskell sensed this was a critical turn, yet still missing a key link. He expanded the review to 6 months of transactions before and after. During that period, Holloway's accounts showed routine internal transfers and small investments, with no irregularities beyond the $40,000 withdrawal. He also checked whether the money was ever deposited into Kellar's accounts or any others, but no trace was found. The cash had completely vanished from the legitimate financial system. In a follow-up interview with Holloway, Haskell asked directly about the transaction. She calmly explained it was payment for a pre-arranged full funeral package that Kellar had offered to prepare in advance for me, in case something happened. The explanation stopped him short. No regulation allowed prepaid cash funeral services through a private intermediary. He recorded her statement and requested any receipt. But she said Kellar kept everything. No documentation was produced. At the North Delta Funeral Home, Haskell reviewed the books. No corresponding cash payment was recorded. The accountant confirmed they had never received or been notified of such a transaction. The money had no official origin. When compiling everything, Haskell created an analysis table, columns for date, transaction type, verifying party, and evidence. Only one entry stood out, November 16, 2010. Withdrawal $40,000 USD. Signed, Daniel Kellar, witness Margaret Holloway. All he had was a black ink form and a vague statement. There was no basis to prove fraud, yet nothing ruled out forgery. Haskell filed the matter in the case's financial section with the note. A regular transaction requires monitoring. In the summary sent to county headquarters, he wrote, bank account review results. Suspicious transaction discovered post-disappearance. Signature matches victim sample, but insufficient evidence of fraud. Retained for further monitoring. As he signed the report, gray clouds covered the sky outside, and the trees in front of the station began shedding leaves. The feeling that something remained incomplete lingered, as though every clue was correct yet still hadn't touched the core of the truth. When the final reports of the initial investigation phase were compiled, Chief Don Haskell realized that nearly 2 months of effort all circled back to the same point. No body, no signs of violence, no evidence of a crime. The evidence seized from Holloway's home only confirmed Daniel Kellar had been there. It said nothing about him leaving. The financial review raised questions about the $40,000 cash withdrawal, but provided insufficient grounds for prosecution or even a criminal investigation. No witness saw Kellar after he entered Holloway's house, and no one saw him leave. What police had was a series of individually accurate details that refused to form a meaningful picture. A man visits an elderly woman, drinks coffee, and disappears. No blood, no evidence of violence, no conflicting statements. Haskell convened the entire team in the investigation room on the last afternoon of 2010. The atmosphere was heavy. The Oxford map on the wall still bore old red marker lines and sticky notes, each search area ending in a small circle symbolizing a dead end. He read through the reports one by one: scene analysis, forensic results, cell data, bank records. Every section contained the phrase, "no conclusive evidence." After discussion with deputy officers and the county representative, he made the official decision the Daniel Kellar case would be classified missing person, unresolved circumstances, and active investigation suspended until new information surfaced. All evidence was moved to the department's evidence locker and resealed per regulations. The original file, plus copies of forensic, financial, and communication reports, were compiled into a dedicated folder numbered 2010-447 and placed in the active, pending leads section. In the summary sent to Jackson, Haskell wrote, "No clear indications of criminal activity. Vital status of missing subject undetermined. File temporarily maintained open pending additional leads." Before signing, he paused, staring at the blank final comment box labeled Lead Investigator's Assessment. He wrote briefly, "Evidence presents no contradictions, but offers no explanation. Cause or criminal act undetermined." Outside the window, Mississippi lay under gray fog, light rain falling steadily on the parking lot. Haskell closed the file and added it to the stack of backlogged cases in the corner, where other brown folders had darkened with age. He knew that once a case entered this status, the chance of resolution nearly evaporated. Still, he added one final line in red ink on the cover. Periodic follow-up, every 6 months. It was the only way he could keep Daniel Kellar's name from completely disappearing from the system, even though in practice, the investigation had reached its absolute limit. Once the suspension decision was officially signed, the Oxford Police Department began the process of transferring the file to the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation as required for unresolved missing persons cases. The handover occurred the first week of January 2011. All related documents, from scene reports and witness statements to forensic and financial reports, were duplicated and bound into 6 separate folders. The master file was labeled Case Hash 2010-447 with a red sticker on the spine reading Daniel Kellar. Missing person as open pending leads. Evidence items were re-inventoried in the presence of 2 county officers and a public prosecutor's representative. Haskell personally read the inventory list: C1, coffee cup; C2, coffee cup; K1, napkin; F1, fabric fiber; M1, soil sample. Search area maps, scene photos, examination reports. The items were placed in an aluminum preservation crate, sealed with moisture-proof nylon tape, and bar-coded according to state storage standards. He signed 3 transfer forms: evidence handover, paper file handover, and digital data handover. The department's tech team copied all photos, maps, and electronic reports onto standard format disks with certified hard copy printouts, then sealed them in anti-static envelopes. The complete package of evidence and files was transported by dedicated vehicle to the MBI Central Evidence Vault in Jackson, approximately 170 kilometers away. The journey was logged with signatures from the driver and preservation officer. As the vehicle pulled out of the station lot early that morning, thick fog still blanketed the road. Haskell watched it leave, feeling as though part of his responsibility was departing with it. He knew that once the file entered the MBI system, primary authority would shift to the state agency, and his role would be limited to coordination if requested. That same afternoon, confirmation of receipt arrived by fax. MBI acknowledges receipt of Case Hash 2010-447. Files and evidence received intact under original seals. Status: cold case. Pending review. The bold heading made the office feel suddenly empty. Haskell took down the Oxford map from the wall, rolled it carefully, and filed the final summary report in his personal cabinet. In the internal duty log, he wrote the last entry for the case: Kellar file transferred to state level. Evidence stored in Jackson. Periodic follow-up upon support request. Outside, the pale afternoon sun gave way to a cold wind off the river, slipping through the window cracks. Inside, only the fading whine of the fax machine remained, marking the end of the first investigation phase, everything now neatly contained in a labeled crate, deep inside the Jackson evidence vault, waiting for someone to open it again. From early 2011, after Daniel Kellar's missing person file was officially transferred to the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, investigative activity virtually ceased. For the first several months, only a few administrative and identity verification requests were sent back to Oxford to complete the file. After that, the case fell silent. Within the MBI system, file hash 2010-447 was placed in the cold case, missing person unresolved category, alongside hundreds of other backlog cases from across the state. The storage crates sat on metal shelves in the Jackson warehouse under dim fluorescent lights, labels faded with age. Kellar's name rested between two other missing persons cases, unremarkable, mentioned only during routine annual reviews. Each year, MBI performed a single file check and priority reassessment. With no new evidence, Kellar's case retained its status. No investigator was assigned full-time. In Oxford, life returned to normal. North Delta Funeral Home continued operating, but Daniel Kellar's name became just a sad memory. His family gradually left town, his sister moved to Memphis, and the small house he lived in was sold to a young couple. Margaret Holloway lived in her suburban wooden house for 2 more years, then sold it in the summer of 2013, citing advanced age and declining health, needing to be closer to family on tax records. She moved to Jackson and bought a small apartment in a quiet northern residential area. Everything was legal. No one took particular notice. Oxford PD learned of it only through the standard address change notification. When Haskell read the update, he simply nodded and noted in the margin, "Final subject left jurisdiction." He himself retired in 2015, handing the position to his successor. Over the next 8 years, there were no new reports, no witnesses came forward, no additional evidence was submitted for testing. Old phone records could no longer be mined because carriers had changed storage formats. Maps marking search points along Old Taylor Road were removed from the board and filed away. In the state's annual cold case list, Kellar occupied one short line, male 38, last seen Oxford November 2010, still missing. By late 2019, the number of backlogged files in Jackson exceeded 5,000, and Kellar's remained in place, gathering dust. No one knew that every clue once found in that wooden house still lay quietly inside its faded sealed box, code 2010-447, waiting for a reason to be reopened. In early 2020, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation launched a pilot program called Digital Cold Case Reprocessing, a state-funded initiative to apply new-generation digital forensic analysis and DNA databases to re-examine long-dormant cases. The project began at the Jackson Center, targeting unsolved disappearances and homicides from 1990 to 2015. Among the nearly 500 cases selected for the initial phase, file hash 2010-447, Daniel Kellar, was placed in the medium priority group because biological evidence remained intact and prior testing had been inconclusive. Review was assigned to Cold Case Unit 4, led by Lieutenant Caleb Rogers. Rogers, an investigator with over 18 years of experience and a background in criminalistics, was known for his meticulousness and habit of reading every page of a new file from the beginning. He received the Kellar file in mid-February in the basement archives of MBI headquarters, where thousands of folders lined steel shelves. Pulling out crate hash 2010-447, fine dust rose from the old seals, still bearing Don Haskell's signature from the January 2011 handover. Rogers set the file on the table, opened the first page, and worked through every report. Scene logs, evidence lists, statements, forensic results, mostly typed in old formats with Haskell's handwritten marginal notes. After finishing, he saw a deceptively simple case with many gaps, no body, no violence, minimal evidence, yet an irregularity in the financial data. Following project guidelines, he compiled a list of items suitable for retesting with modern methods, sealed biological samples, C1, C2, K1, F1, and M1, plus original scene photos on CD. He requested the Jackson Evidence Vault verify condition. The response confirmed the crate remained sealed and properly stored at stable temperature. Rogers filed an extraction form to temporarily transfer the items to the MBI Digital Lab for evaluation. He simultaneously requested internal access to the state DNA database and national CODIS for recomparison of all previously unidentified samples. In his duty log, he wrote the first entry for the case, reopen #2010-447, status dormant since 2011, to be reviewed under digital cold case program. Next, Rogers met with forensic technicians and digital analysts. They mapped out a detailed plan, re-extract touch DNA from fiber F1, analyze soil M1 for microbial elements, and reprocess the old digital data on the storage disks. One technician suggested using modern optical scanning to reconstruct the 2010 scene photos into a 3D model for better spatial understanding of evidence placement. Rogers approved and added a request to recheck DNA overlap between the coffee cups and napkin to determine possible differences in usage sequence from the original report. All items were listed for re-examination with priority numbers 1 through 6. When finished, he signed the re-examination request form, case #2010-447. At the end of the day, he placed the file in the processing tray with a small sticky note. Victim last seen entering Margaret Holloway's residence. Vital status unknown. Re-examine all biological evidence recovered from scene. The fluorescent lights reflected off the old folder, making Haskell's faded handwriting visible. Rogers paused for a moment, imagining the previous investigator writing pending leads in red ink, and understood that his job now was to discover whether anything in those aged pages could still speak. When the evidence list was approved under the Digital Cold Case Project, the fabric fiber sample labeled F1, collected from the Holloway garage door frame in 2010, was selected as the first item for re-examination. Lieutenant Caleb Rogers oversaw the unsealing process at the Jackson Laboratory, witnessed by 2 technicians and a representative from the evidence vault. The old sealing tape was carefully cut, revealing a glass vial containing a gray fabric fiber less than 2 centimeters long, lightly coiled around a paper core. The 2010 forensic report had concluded origin undetermined, but at that time, technology was not advanced enough to isolate touch DNA. By 2020, the lab had been equipped with new generation touch DNA equipment capable of extracting genetic material from surfaces even after brief contact. The sample was placed on a glass plate exposed to ultraviolet light to identify areas with epithelial cell adhesion, then transferred to a micro-extraction process. After 72 hours, preliminary analysis recorded the presence of human DNA at an extremely low concentration but sufficient for amplification. The technicians used a complete STR genetic analysis system to compare it against the MBI database. The recovered DNA strand matched 15 loci with a biological profile of Daniel Kellar, stored since 2010. The similarity reached 99.98%, confirming the fiber carried the victim's epithelial cells. The technical report stated clearly, sample F1, partial human epithelial DNA, matched to ref. Sample Daniel Kellar. Confidence level 99.98%. Rogers read the results and requested cross-verification using quantitative fluorescence reaction to rule out cross-contamination from other items. The second test matched perfectly. The discovery of Kellar's DNA on the fiber attached to the garage door frame meant he had been present in that area, an area the old report gave no legitimate reason for him to be in. During the same re-examination round, the technicians continued testing soil sample M1, previously determined to contain no biological elements. This time, they used combined spectroscopic and microchemical analysis to search for hemoglobin traces. Under fluorescent light, a weak positive reaction appeared, indicating the presence of highly degraded organic compounds originating from human blood. Further, ELISA testing confirmed it was human blood, not animal. Rogers noted in the internal record, soil sample M1, positive for human hemoglobin location, adjacent to garage wall. These 2 findings combined created the first clear turning point in the case. After nearly a decade, the victim's DNA and human blood traces were both confirmed in the Holloway garage area. Rogers presented the preliminary discoveries to the cold case leadership, detailing the tests performed and statistical reliability. His 12-page report included photos of the analysis process, DNA amplification charts, and a map of sample locations. He underlined the conclusion in red ink, "New results sufficient to warrant re-evaluation of the scene." Although these discoveries were not yet enough to establish criminal conduct, under MBI regulations, any new biological evidence directly linked to a missing person within a suspicious location was grounds to reassess the file. Rogers finalized the minutes and submitted a formal request to the Central Region Director of Investigations Office. In the proposal form, he wrote concisely, "Re-examination results of evidence samples F1 and M1 indicate the presence of the missing person's DNA in the garage area of property owned by Margaret Holloway. Recommend reopening field investigation to verify trace formation context." Before signing, he flipped back to the first page of the old file, where Haskell's handwritten note still read, "No signs of violence." Now, that line no longer seemed accurate. Rogers folded the documents, placed them in a yellow internal envelope, sealed it with an official stamp, and sent it to the director's desk. That night, in the office lit only by the final amplification cycle of the DNA analyzer humming steadily, like the patient heartbeat of time itself, the case that had appeared closed for nearly a decade began to stir once more. After the proposal to reopen the case was submitted, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers continued reviewing the remaining evidence catalog in storage, aiming to find additional data to support the newly confirmed DNA results. One item immediately caught his attention. Mobile phone belonging to Margaret Holloway, Motorola Razr model, seized from the 2010 scene. The device was sealed in a clear plastic bag bearing Haskell's faded signature label. According to the original record, the phone had been powered off and inaccessible due to a dead battery. Rogers decided to re-examine it. Since under the Digital Cold Case project, the MBI digital unit was equipped with Cellebrite UFED software, capable of extracting data even from non-functional older devices. He brought the phone to the tech lab, where data specialist Jason Bird took charge. They unsealed it under surveillance cameras, documenting every step. The device was connected to a power emulator, fitted with a temporary battery, and linked via a dedicated data port. After a few minutes, the screen displayed an error icon, but Cellebrite detected hardware response. The system scan began, and recovered data gradually appeared: contacts, messages, call logs, and audio files. Most data had been deleted, leaving only scattered records. Rogers asked to filter by November 15 and 16, 2010, the period coinciding with the night Daniel Kellar vanished. Among the results was an unsent draft message, auto-saved at 21:46, on the evening of November 15. It had no recipient and contained only a few simple lines. He said, "I can't leave. I'm scared of him." The system showed status unsent draft, with no evidence the message had ever been edited or sent. Rogers read each word slowly, verified the timestamp, and confirmed the time zone matched the Oxford cell tower system. This message had never been mentioned in the old file, likely because in 2010 the device could not recover deleted data using standard methods. He requested full raw data extraction, saved to a separate drive, and created a record with authenticated screenshots. Reviewing the entire message log, he noted no other entries after that time. The phone's last signal perfectly matched the moment Kellar's own phone went silent. Rogers noted, "Draft message saved 21:46. Content indicates fear, highly likely directly related to the disappearance event." He asked Bird to verify file structure for any signs of tampering or recovery errors. Checksum validation confirmed the data was original and unaltered. The message file was assigned digital evidence code D1, printed, photographed, and logged with system metadata. Besides this message, the phone logged a few incoming calls from local landlines that afternoon, including a 2-minute call to a maintenance service and a short unidentified call lasting under 10 seconds. Rogers focused on the single message, the first digital evidence suggesting conflict or threat. The phrases, "I can't leave," and "I'm scared of him," implied a conversation, indicating the writer was being restrained or pressured by a male present at the same location. He printed an authenticated copy of the message, sealed it, and filed it with the description. Discovery of unsent message likely related to conflict between Holloway and Kellar within disappearance time frame. In his duty log, he wrote personally, "This digital document creates the first fracture in Holloway's statement structure. Content reflects fear, contradicting the calm demeanor recorded in 2010. He continued checking call logs to identify who Holloway might have intended to contact, but the draft had no recipient saved, and the phone's contacts contained only familiar local numbers. Rogers circled the timestamps 2146 and 2210 on his notepad. As they marked the final moments, both phones, Holloway's and Kellar's, registered signals before going dark forever. All data was exported to an encrypted drive and formally returned to him under secure protocol. Before leaving the lab, Rogers stood looking at the old phone. Its scratched silver casing glinted under the lights. A device thought useless for 10 years had become the only remaining holder of that night's silent voice. A few short, chilling words, enough to change everything once considered. Just a normal evening. After obtaining digital data, confirming signs of conflict on the night Daniel Kellar vanished, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers immediately prepared a summary report to the state prosecutor's office, requesting a new search warrant for Margaret Holloway's former home in Oxford, now owned by another family. The file, including copies of the DNA results and the unsent message, was submitted to the Lafayette County judge, and the warrant was approved 2 days later on grounds of new discoveries capable of proving a crime scene. In early June 2020, Rogers and the forensic team returned to the house on Old Taylor Road, once sealed off a decade earlier. The current owners, a young couple, cooperated fully and left during the search. The morning sky was heavy with humidity. Overnight rain had left a thin layer of mud on the driveway. When the team opened the metal garage door, its fresh light gray paint reflected flashlight beams, and the faint smell of paint solvent still lingered. Rogers ordered a full wall scan with ultraviolet light to check for old seepage. In the left corner, right against the concrete floor, a technician detected several faint arc-shaped streaks hidden beneath the new paint, emitting weak blue fluorescence. They marked the spot, scraped off the surface paint with a blade, revealing a darker area underneath. Luminol testing was performed on site. Seconds after spraying, a clear blue-green glow spread horizontally across the wall and dripped onto the concrete floor. The team paused briefly as the faint light faded, but it was enough to confirm a reaction with iron-containing compounds, evidence of human blood once present. Rogers precisely noted the location, ordered concrete samples cut to a depth of about 3 centimeters, labeled L1 through L4, placed in containers, and sealed. The reactive wall section was scraped further to rule out recent contamination. All samples were rushed to the Jackson lab the same day for priority DNA analysis. While awaiting results, the team scanned the entire garage floor and found 2 additional weak reaction points, one near the back door, one at the base of the wall. Both were sampled. The entire process was recorded by forensic cameras and backed up directly to the system. Back at the office, Rogers compiled the field reports and added luminol reaction photos to the file. 48 hours later, DNA results arrived via internal channel. Samples L1-L4 contain human DNA traces matching reference sample Daniel Kellar. No second DNA profile detected. The report also confirmed the blood traces were covered by synthetic acrylic paint applied around 2012 based on material aging. After Holloway had sold the house, Rogers read the results, gripping the edge of his desk. 10 years earlier, Haskell had written that the garage showed no signs of violence, yet now that very place held direct biological evidence of the victim. He immediately called the cold case unit commander to report the new finding. In the official report he wrote, "Holloway garage confirmed to contain human blood traces, DNA matching victim. This is the first physical evidence directly linking the missing person to a potential crime scene." Along with the DNA results, he included luminol photos and scene structure description, noting the height and position of the glowing streaks corresponded to a standing adult's torso. Preliminary analysis suggested spatter direction and angle consistent with close-range head or chest trauma, but he avoided speculation in the report. In the conclusion, Rogers recommended designating the garage as the primary scene and requested a 2-week preservation order for further detailed measurements. As he signed off, the wall clock showed nearly midnight. Outside, light rain returned, streaking the window with patterns identical to the glowing traces he had just seen on the garage wall. Faint but persistent marks, like this case itself, once thought buried by time, now glowing again in the dark. The discovery of blood traces matching Daniel Kellar's DNA in the Holloway garage completely shifted the investigation, forcing the FBI to reopen every previously shelved avenue, including the financial angle, something Don Haskell had noted in 2010 as unusual transactions. Insufficient evidence. Lieutenant Caleb Rogers requested the Financial Crimes Unit, in coordination with the State Treasury Department, to review all tax records, accounts, and trusts ever registered to Margaret Holloway from 2010 to 2013, the period she was still alive and later sold the house and moved to Jackson. Initial reports revealed she owned at least 4 personal accounts, 2 stock portfolios, and a charity registered as the Holloway Foundation for Community Health. The charity had been opened in 2005 and operated modestly, mainly supporting the local hospital. However, starting late 2010, the foundation's cash flow showed sudden drastic changes. Bank statements from Southern Credit Union showed that in just 8 months, from December 2010 to July 2011, the Holloway Foundation transferred large sums totaling over $3.8 million to a newly established entity called the Kellar Foundation for Youth Scholarship. Registration documents for this organization were filed at the same Jackson notary office, signed Daniel Kellar, founder. Rogers checked the incorporation date, December 28, 2010. Barely more than a month after Kellar was reported missing. The coincidence immediately drew the financial team's attention. He ordered retrieval of the bank's original electronic records to verify who executed the transaction. Initial findings showed every transfer was initiated online from a fixed IP address at Holloway's private residence in Jackson. The initiating user was M. Holloway with an electronic signature matching her personal banking profile. However, the recipient authorization signature, Daniel Kellar, was determined by handwriting comparison software to be forged curves, pen angles, and slant clearly deviated from authentic samples in his bank records. The technical report concluded, signature mismatch, artificial reproduction likely through manual imitation. Additionally, system timestamps showed all transactions occurred at night, between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Unusual hours for an elderly woman. Rogers pulled network access logs for Holloway's home address, cross-referenced the IP, and confirmed a perfect match. In other words, the money was moved from her personal computer under the beneficiary name of the missing man. Tracing the Kellar Foundation revealed it had no real activity, existing only on paper, registered with a fake passport and a vacant office address. All transferred funds were gradually withdrawn through multiple financial intermediaries and ultimately consolidated back into a separate account opened by Margaret Holloway at another bank. Over $3.2 million returned as grant refunds, with the remainder invested in certificates of deposit. Rogers presented the findings to the cold case unit. The money had formed a closed loop, using the missing man's name to legitimize personal asset transfers. He requested comparison of the first transaction's digital footprint from December 28, 2010, with any surviving Holloway computer data. The Digital Forensics Unit extracted backups from her old hard drive, previously seized and stored, and located bank login logs with automatically saved username and password. The password saved timestamp matched the exact date of the first transfer. This meant Holloway had created and controlled the entire operation. Motive, however, still needed clear establishment. Rogers reviewed tax files in November 2010, 2 weeks before Kellar's disappearance. Holloway had signed a $4.2 million real estate transfer, but had not yet paid inheritance tax on her late husband's estate. Moving funds through the Kellar Foundation may have been intended to conceal capital and evade financial scrutiny. He compiled all evidence into a financial flowchart. Arrows from Holloway Foundation to Kellar Foundation and back to her personal accounts. At the bottom he noted, potential money laundering value, 3.8 MUSD. In the final report he wrote, financial transactions indicate likely identity forgery of the victim to legitimize asset transfers. IP traced to Holloway residence. Daniel Kellar's electronic signature forged. Clear financial motive. He forwarded the report to the State Director of Investigations with a formal request to classify the case as fraud and homicide correlation. As he left the office, he glanced back at the computer screen where the report's final line still blinked. Motivation established. Financial gain. After 10 years, the ultimate purpose of that fateful evening in 2010 was finally taking shape. Money. The one thing capable of making a person disappear without a trace. After establishing the financial motive and the flow diagram of $3.8 million between the funds bearing the names Holloway and Kellar, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers continued to request the Personnel Analysis Unit to review individuals who had access or management authority over Margaret Holloway's assets during the period 2010-2013. Among the list of involved persons, one name stood out, David Holloway, her adopted nephew, who had been authorized as legal representative for investments since 2008 and was the named asset manager when she sold her house in Oxford to move to Jackson in 2013. David's background file showed he was born in 1975, had previously worked as a financial advisor for a small investment firm in Biloxi, then moved to Jackson to work independently. In tax records, his name appeared in several documents related to the restructuring of the Holloway Foundation, listed with the title Financial Consultant. Rogers found this particularly suspicious. If David was managing the funds, it was entirely plausible that he had access to her banking system. He asked the technical unit to pull old bank login logs and cross-reference them with IP address data. An unexpected result emerged. In addition to the IP from Mrs. Holloway's home, there were 3 login sessions from an IP address belonging to David's former investment company, occurring within the same timeframe as the first transactions. When cross-checked, these login sessions took place immediately following Daniel Kellar's disappearance between late November and mid-December 2010. Rogers requested extraction of David's travel records from that period from the DMV system and credit card transactions to establish location. The data showed he used his card to buy gas at a rest stop 5 miles from Oxford on November 18, just 3 days after Kellar was reported missing, and booked a local hotel room for 2 nights. In that year's tax return, David declared he was in Biloxi during the corresponding period, but GPS data from payment receipts and the gas station showed otherwise. Rogers flagged this detail in his report. David Holloway was present in Oxford shortly after the disappearance, contrary to tax declaration. He continued reviewing the man's travel records in subsequent years and discovered David held an account at the same bank where the charity funds were transferred back and forth, and he received 3 consulting fee payments, totaling $125,000 from the Holloway Foundation account in 2011. When the origin was checked, these payments had no accompanying invoices or contracts. Rogers presented all the data to the cold case unit team, pointing out that David's presence in Oxford immediately after the disappearance and his retained financial access to his adoptive aunt made him the primary person of interest. He contacted the Jackson Court Archives to check the power of attorney records and discovered the original Holloway power of attorney document bore a witness signature from David himself, signed in 2008, granting him authority to conduct all financial transactions in the event she experienced health difficulties. That document had never been revoked. In the 2010 bank records, the person who verified Mrs. Holloway's online account information was also listed as David H., another matching detail. Rogers compiled a detailed catalog of technical evidence, numbering D01 as the travel timeline, D02 as the matching IP data, and D03 as the financial power of attorney. He noted in the summary report, subject had motive to access assets, banking system access capability, and was present in Oxford at a sensitive time. Level of involvement, direct. To strengthen the data, he asked the tech unit to pinpoint the exact login locations via network mapping. The result displayed coordinates in East Oxford suburbs, less than 4 miles from Mrs. Holloway's house. That proved at least one of the initial fund transactions was initiated in the area where the disappearance occurred. When cross-referencing travel records, gas receipts, hotel bookings, and IP data, Rogers reconstructed the timeline. Evening of November 15th, Daniel Kellar vanishes. November 18th. David appears in Oxford. Late November, bank account logins from the local area. December, establishment of the Kellar Foundation. All the markers connected like a chain reaction. In the report's conclusion, he wrote, "Financial and location evidence confirmed David Holloway's presence in Oxford after the victim's disappearance, together with financial access and benefit from transfers. Establish potential affiliated suspect." He printed the report, clipped it into the case file, and marked it in red ink with just 2 words: follow trail. The 10-year-old case that seemed closed now had a much clearer shape. It was no longer just the story of a wealthy woman and a man who vanished, but also the shadow of another figure standing behind the numbers, quietly directing the flow of money and present in the right place at the exact moment. Everything began to disappear. The financial and location data proving David Holloway's presence in Oxford immediately after Daniel Kellar went missing provided sufficient grounds for the MBI to expand the scope of investigation. Lieutenant Caleb Rogers prepared a comprehensive report attaching the DNA results, IP data, and travel timeline, and requested the Mississippi State Prosecutor's Office to obtain a search warrant for the house Margaret Holloway had owned in Jackson, where she lived from 2013 until her death 4 years later. The Hinds County judge approved the warrant within 36 hours, citing the probable cause, evidence concealment clause that allowed full access to the entire property, including the main house and the detached storage shed in the back. On the morning of July 2, 2020, Rogers, the forensic technical team, and 2 prosecutors arrived at 1723 Pinebrook Drive, Jackson. The house was in a quiet residential neighborhood, white fence, wide lawn, outwardly completely ordinary. Rogers presented the warrant, read the authority, and began the search in sequence. The living room and common areas showed no abnormalities beyond a thick layer of dust. However, when they reached the rear storage shed, a small room separated by a wooden door with a newly replaced lock, the current owners said they had never opened it because it was marked private storage. Keep locked when they bought the property. The technical team broke the lock. Flashlight beams swept into the small space, revealing a smell of damp and old wood. The room contained a few old cardboard boxes, 2 rusty metal shelves, and a large wooden chest placed against the wall, covered with a thin blanket. When the cover was pulled back, dust filled the air. Rogers noticed the chest was secured with steel wire wrapped tightly around it. They cut the wire and lifted the lid. Inside were strange items: a neatly folded white burial shroud, several pieces of dark-colored fabric, a bottle of adhesive glue, a coil of thin nylon cord, and 2 pairs of rubber gloves that had yellowed with age. At the bottom of the chest, a dried brown stain adhered to the wood. The technician immediately shone a fluorescent light on it. The stain glowed faintly, exhibiting the characteristic reaction of old blood. They took samples from 3 different spots, labeled R1, R3, sealed them in vials, and photographed close-ups. Additionally, inside the chest was a small plastic bag containing strands of hair stuck to the shroud fabric, collected separately and labeled H1. Rogers stood silent for a few seconds, staring at the chest, an object that seemed not to belong in this ordinary house, then ordered a full scan of the surrounding floor. When the technician swept the area with UV light, several scattered fluorescent spots appeared on the floor, forming a faint trail toward the corner wall. These spots were also sampled as supplements. While the forensic team worked, Rogers examined an old desk placed nearby. The bottom drawer was locked, Inside were an old-style computer hard drive and several unlabeled CDs. Everything was sealed and coded DHD01. He drafted a temporary evidence log fully describing the items. Wooden chest, storage container, containing blood traces, burial shroud material, human hair, wrapping and binding tools, plus digital storage hard drive. When collection was complete, the evidence was transported to the Jackson laboratory that same night. 48 hours later, preliminary results arrived. Blood samples R1, R3, contained human DNA that matched Daniel Kellar's reference sample with 99.99% certainty. Hair sample, H1, also contained male DNA with an identical genetic sequence, confirming the same source. The forensic report stated, presence of human blood and hair consistent with victim profile. All samples indicate extended exposure prior to concealment. These results convinced Rogers that the Oxford garage was only the initial scene, while the Jackson house was likely the final storage and processing location for the evidence. He added the results to the official report, noting clearly, samples collected at the Jackson storage shed test positive for victim DNA. Physical evidence confirms the victim was present or transported through this location. Recommend expanding investigation to adjacent property areas. He also directed the digital unit to back up the seized hard drive and analyze file contents and access history. As the wooden chest was sealed, Rogers felt a chill run down his spine. The smell of paint, the burial shroud, and the dried blood felt as if everything had been hidden here for 10 years, waiting for the light to call its name. He signed the evidence log, concluding the search near midnight as light rain fell over Jackson, the sound of distant trucks mixing with the humid air. In his personal notebook, he wrote a short line before closing it. July 2, 2020, wooden chest, blood traces, DNA match, secondary crime scene identified. After the Jackson house was searched and all evidence sealed, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers transferred the hard drive seized from the storage shed, evidence code DHD01, to the MBI Digital Analysis Lab for data recovery. The drive was a 2009 Western Digital 320 GB model, covered in thick dust, with no identification label. Following protocol, the technician connected it to a specialized forensic reader and created a full bit-for-bit image copy to avoid altering the original. Forensic software revealed the drive had been encrypted with an old Windows XP program, but some metadata files remained undeleted. Rogers sat with the technician watching the automated scan that lasted over 3 hours. When the file list finally appeared, a folder named Danny_2010 showed up at the very end of the drive, created on November 17, 2010, just 2 days after Daniel Kellar disappeared. The folder was approximately 4.6 GB and contained multiple subfiles, several financial spreadsheets in XLS format, a few doc text files titled Transfer Plan and Account Codes, and 2 encrypted ADV video files that could not be opened directly. Rogers immediately ordered the entire folder copied to a separate drive labeled DHD01, while noting that the file timestamps matched the period of the first money transfers from the Holloway Foundation to the Kellar Foundation. Among the spreadsheet files, the technician was able to open the first 4, which displayed lists of bank accounts, identification codes, and transfer amounts that matched almost perfectly with the data previously reconstructed by MBI's financial unit. The doc files contained short notes describing in detail the methods for laundering the funds, mentioning 2 individuals, M. Holloway and D. Holloway. One scanned handwritten note included the line, "If he talks, everything collapses." Rogers read it repeatedly, realizing the note was saved on the same day the folder was created. Everything pointed to someone in the house knowing about Daniel Kellar's disappearance and fearing the financial consequences. When the tech team attempted to play the 2 video files, the system reported corrupted file due to second-layer encryption. Rogers ordered the hard drive and the Danny_2010 folder copy sent to the Central Forensic Lab for deeper decryption. However, the encryption complexity exceeded MBI's civilian software capabilities. After reporting to superiors, the Director of Investigations decided to request assistance from the FBI Cyber Forensics Unit at Quantico. On July 9, 2020, the drive and data copies were handed over to FBI Technical Special Agent Angela Pierce, the Southern States Liaison. Rogers briefed her on the case summary, the evidence origin, and emphasized the potential direct relevance of the two video files to the night of the disappearance. Pierce acknowledged receipt and transferred the drive to a federal-level secure analysis room. Decryption took over 12 hours using advanced data recovery tools and sequential cracking algorithms. Around midnight, Pierce called Rogers, "We've got part of it." When he arrived at the lab, the screen showed the Danny_2010 folder with one newly reconstructed file, garagefootage.av, 1.3 GB, timestamped November 15, 2010, 21:38. The second file, transfernotes.av, was dated November 16, 1 day later. The first file played a short segment blurry image, camera apparently placed in a dark corner, low angle aimed at a metal garage door. Dim yellow light, two silhouettes, one male, one female, moving in frame, faces unclear. The man wore a light-colored shirt, the silver-haired woman tall. A faint voice in the background, "You can't leave until we fix this." After a few seconds, the image shook violently and cut off. Rogers said nothing, only requested full backups of the video segment, coded vid01, with 2 sealed copies. The second file still could not be fully opened due to remaining encryption. The FBI promised follow-up results. Pierce recommended additional backups at the Federal Archive in case of loss. Rogers signed the transfer log and returned to his office with the data copy in hand. On the drive back, he reread his investigation log, from the gray fabric fiber in the garage to the blood under the paint, the draft text message. Then the Danny_2010 folder. Everything was linking together into a cold, logical chain. In the report sent to command the next morning, he wrote, "Hard drive recovered from Jackson House contains Danny_2010 folder with financial data and video files, timestamped to the night of disappearance. Data decrypted with FBI assistance. Evidence indicates recording at the scene at the time of the incident." The final line of the report he typed slowly. Video footage =, direct physical context. The decade-old evidence that had seemed silently buried was now beginning to speak for itself. After the FBI completed decryption of garagefootage.av, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers was invited to the Central Forensic Lab to observe the in-depth analysis directly. The recovered video was low resolution, only 480p, but sufficient to identify shapes and ambient sound. The opening was blurry, the camera slightly shaking, with the on-screen timestamp confirming 21:38 on the evening of November 15, 2010. Exactly the window when Daniel Kellar disappeared. The footage was shot from a low right corner of the garage, lens angled upward toward the metal door, showing part of the cement floor and the corner of a wooden table. The only light came from a dangling round bulb that flickered. 2 figures moved in frame, one tall and thin, likely Kellar, wearing a light-colored shirt, the other a silver-haired woman presumed to be David Holloway. Initially they stood some distance apart. Background sound was only a car engine winding down. In the first 30 seconds, a short exchange could be heard, the woman's voice low and slightly trembling. "You shouldn't have come tonight." Then the man's voice low with a southern drawl, "We need to talk about the money, Maggie." A long silence followed, then the sound of something dropping onto the floor, possibly a cup or small metal object. The camera shook slightly, as if bumped. Rapid breathing, followed by impact sounds, 2 heavy echoing thuds in quick succession, then hurried footsteps. The woman's voice cried out softly, words unclear, followed by a prolonged scraping sound like a hard object being dragged across the floor. One figure collapsed out of frame. The remaining figure moved quickly toward the door. Light flashed. Then the image went black. The technician paused, rewound the audio slowly, and filtered high frequencies for analysis. Spectral analysis revealed 2 strong sound pulses matching the signature of mechanical impacts. Wood striking metal, followed by the low thud characteristic of a body hitting cement. Rogers studied the graph and asked the audio forensic expert, "Chance of accidental fall?" The expert shook his head. "No. 2 deliberate pulses not reflective of a slip. Interval between impacts is 0.7 seconds, characteristic of intentional action." When slowed frame by frame, Rogers noticed that just before the impacts, the man's hand rose holding a long object that glinted faintly. The low angle and poor light made the object unclear, but it could be a metal pipe or tool. The next frame showed the woman's head snapping sharply backward, followed by her fall out of frame. Immediately before the image faded, a faint male voice could be heard through static. "I didn't mean then." The video signal ended. The technician replayed the final segment multiple times, analyzing light intensity and camera angle to determine the recorder's position. A reflection on the metal garage door revealed the faint outline of the camera placed on a wall shelf, indicating it was fixed in place, not handheld. Rogers noted, "Fixed camera, intentional recording purpose." He requested the full clip be run again in motion analysis mode. Results showed the 2 individuals were only about 1.2 meters apart at the moment of impact, close enough for a direct blow to cause severe injury. The final 1.4-second audio segment was identified by the system as a metallic screech, possibly the garage door being closed from inside. When analyzing background layers, the expert identified an anomalous sound between 047 and 049. A 900 Hz frequency spike characteristic of a muffled scream. That strengthened the assault hypothesis rather than an accident. Rogers sat staring at the frozen final frame, the hanging bulb swaying slightly, its light reflecting off a dark smear on the floor. The same spot where police later found blood beneath the paint. He felt the entire chain of events from 10 years ago replaying before his eyes. In the analysis report sent back to MBI, he wrote, "Video garage footage.avi records 2 individuals, male and female. Contains sounds of heavy impacts, a brief scream and body hitting the floor. Audio analysis confirms intentional action, not accidental reflex. Based on scene evidence, this is the first visual proof that an altercation occurred in the garage." He ended the summary in bold, "Footage corroborates physical evidence, incident intentional." When the screen went dark, the room was silent, except for the hum of cooling fans and faint static from the equipment. Rogers stood up, took a deep breath, knowing that from this moment, the case could no longer be treated as a simple missing person matter. The images in the video had crossed the boundary of suspicion and become living evidence of what the old reports had never dared to state outright. There had been a confrontation, and it was not random. After the video footage was analyzed and confirmed to show a high probability of an intentional altercation inside the Holloway residence garage, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers and the Cold Case Unit investigation team officially reclassified the case from missing person to criminal investigation. Based on the established chain of physical and financial evidence, the Mississippi State Prosecutor signed a subpoena for David Holloway, Margaret Holloway's adopted grandson and former financial power of attorney, to appear for formal questioning at the MBI headquarters in Jackson. The interrogation took place on July 15, 2020, in a monitored interview room equipped with cameras and overseen by the district attorney's office. Rogers personally conducted the interview, joined by FBI technical agent Angela Pierce, who attended in an advisory capacity for data matters. David entered the room wearing a dark suit, outwardly calm, but his eyes flickered when he saw the thick case file stacked in front of him. Rogers began with basic questions about his role in managing finances, then quickly moved to the series of transactions between the Holloway Foundation and the Kellar Foundation. He displayed a financial flowchart on the screen, with arrows showing the movement of $3.8 million that flowed through Margaret Holloway's accounts and back to her via the sham foundation. When asked about the reason for these transfers and the registration of a foundation under the name Daniel Kellar, David answered slowly, "Maggie told me to do it to avoid taxes." There was nothing illegal about it. Rogers said nothing. Simply placed in front of him a printed copy of the recovered folder, Danny_2010 from the hard drive, containing documents signed D. Holloway. David glanced through it, swallowed hard, and said in a low voice, "I only helped her draft the plan. I didn't know anything else." Rogers then played the video file, garagefootage.av, pausing on the frame showing two figures. He looked directly at David. "Do you recognize this as the garage in Oxford, where Mrs. Holloway and Kellar once met?" David remained silent for a moment, then said quietly, "I wasn't there that night." Rogers continued playing the audio portion, the brief exchange followed by two impact sounds. When the clip ended, he placed his hands on the table and said slowly, "We have Kellar's DNA in the garage and his blood in the wooden trunk at Mrs. Holloway's Jackson residence. Would you like to explain this for her?" The room grew heavy with tension. David leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the table. After nearly 5 minutes of silence, he sighed. "I only know part of it. I didn't kill anyone." Rogers showed no reaction, merely signaled for the recorder to keep running. David recounted that the morning after the disappearance, Maggie called him to Oxford to help handle an unpleasant matter. When he arrived, she was standing outside the garage with the door closed, said there had been an accident, and asked him to bury something heavy in the ground behind the property. According to David, she claimed it was something that needed to be hidden for safety. He said he was terrified, but helped because he believed she might be in financial trouble and only needed to conceal some kind of evidence. When Rogers pressed him on exactly what the object was, David paused for a long time before answering softly. "I didn't dare open it, it just looked like something wrapped in fabric." He stated that they did the burial the following evening in light rain, dug a deep hole behind the southern tree line, took nearly 2 hours, then covered it back up. Rogers asked him to describe the precise location, how far from the house, and in what direction. David replied, "About 40 meters behind the garage, in the slight depression near the pine row." When asked why he never reported it to police, he said Mrs. Holloway had threatened to ruin my life if he ever spoke. After she sold the house and moved to Jackson, he continued handling her finances, but never brought it up again. Rogers took detailed notes and marked the entire statement. When cross-referenced with old records, the location David described matched an area that had been outside the original 10-year-old search perimeter, undeveloped and swampy at the time. He had the technician print a satellite map of the area and asked David to mark the spot with a red pen. David circled a point and wrote tree line south. Rogers turned to Agent Pierce, signaled to stop recording, then asked directly, "If what you're saying is true, what's buried there is either evidence or a body. Are you willing to take us to it?" David looked down at his trembling hands, then nodded. "I'll show you, if you guarantee my protection." Rogers signed the transcript, read aloud the closing section. Statement of suspect David Holloway admits participation in moving or concealing an object on the property behind Margaret Holloway's residence on the night of November 16, 2010. Possible direct involvement in the disappearance of Daniel Kellar. As David left the room, no one spoke. Rogers closed the file, his eyes lingering on the words, "Tree line south," feeling that the 10-year-old case had reached the point of no return, where the silence of the earth would soon have to speak for the people. 2 days after the interrogation, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers received emergency approval from the state prosecutor's office to excavate the land behind Margaret Holloway's former Oxford residence based on David Holloway's information. On the morning of July 17, 2020, the sky was overcast and thick fog clung to the southern pine rows. The air carried the damp, decaying smell of rain-soaked soil. The MBI forensic team, working with the FBI Jackson Field Crime Scene Unit, cordoned off the search area, erected white tents, and strung tape around a 50-meter radius. Rogers commanded the operation on site, holding the satellite map with David's red circle. The marked spot lay in a low-lying area near ancient oaks, where thick grass completely covered the ground. Metal detectors registered no significant hits, but ground-penetrating radar showed structural disturbance about 80 centimeters below the surface. clear signs of prior digging. Forensic technicians began removing soil in careful layers with small trowels. After nearly 2 hours, the soil darkened, mixed with roots and gravel. At approximately 90 centimeters deep, one of the diggers quietly called out. The tip of his trowel had struck something hard. Rogers approached, put on gloves, and carefully brushed away the surrounding dirt. Beneath the mud appeared a small ivory-gray bone fragment, shaped like a human finger phalanx. Right beside it was a long dark hair matted with dried mud. The area was immediately expanded and secured. Everyone stopped work. The forensic team established standard excavation protocol, widening the radius 1 meter around the find and proceeding in 10-centimeter levels. They recovered 3 additional small bone fragments, none intact, along with several more hairs embedded in the soil. Everything was sequentially labeled E1 through E6 and placed in sterile biosample containers. Additional surrounding soil was collected for trace analysis. As sunlight began breaking through the clouds, the entire scene was photographed from multiple angles, mapped, and annotated with depth, orientation, and soil temperature. Rogers surveyed the area, feeling the ground itself was recounting what people had tried to forget for 10 years. While the forensic team collected samples, he stepped outside the cordon and called the MBI office to initiate chain of custody transfer of the evidence to the FBI lab at Quantico for DNA comparison. Before sealing, the lead forensic examiner gave a preliminary assessment, bone structure consistent with adult human, highly likely male. All items were packed into specialized metal cases, triple sealed, and labeled Oxford Recovery Site July 17, 2020. GPS coordinates were logged with panoramic photos. Technicians separately bagged foundational soil to prevent cross-contamination, a total of 23 evidence bags, each bar-coded. When work concluded, the excavation was covered with tarps and posted forensic excavation, no entry. Rogers signed the final scene log, reading aloud to the team, biological evidence E1, E6, and soil samples forwarded to FBI Quantico for identification and time of death analysis. Full chain of custody maintained. That afternoon, an MBI transport vehicle left the site under local police escort, carrying the sealed evidence toward Jackson for onward flight. Rogers watched the convoy disappear, boots caked in mud, David's words from the previous day repeating in his mind, "Bury something heavy," and now that something heavy was gradually emerging from the earth. He walked back to the taped area. Sunlight pierced the mist and fell on the freshly dug depression, where cut marks still glistened with water. 10 years earlier, no one imagined this ground held anything but weeds. Now the tiny bone fragments and hairs were enough to pivot the entire Daniel Kellar file, from missing person to positive identification. Rogers wrote the final line in the scene, log in firm handwriting, excavation complete. Suspected human remains. Sealed and transferred to Quantico. As he closed the notebook, wind moved through the pines with a rustling sound like the old breathing of the earth, echoing in the silence of a case newly revived. The evidence recovered from the excavation behind Margaret Holloway's former home reached the FBI Forensic Biology Laboratory at Quantico within 48 hours of leaving Oxford. Chain of custody protocol was strictly observed, accompanied by full transport logs signed by Lieutenant Caleb Rogers. When the containers were opened under sterile conditions, technicians documented 6 bone fragments of varying sizes. 2 were identified as portions of an adult human skull, darkly stained with jagged, uneven fracture edges. The associated hairs were cleaned with neutral solution, dried, and prepared for DNA analysis. Because the bone was heavily degraded, the team elected mitochondrial DNA extraction, which traces maternal lineage. A reference sample was provided by Daniel Kellar's sister, whose profile had been in the National Missing Persons Database since 2011. Analysis required 12 days, including 3 amplification cycles and automated comparison against CODIS. Results were conclusive. The mitochondrial DNA sequence from the bone matched the reference exactly, with 99.997% certainty. The official report stated, mitochondrial DNA match, maternal lineage, consistent with Daniel Kellar. Rogers received the results on the morning of July 31, 2020, and stood motionless for several seconds before that line of confirmation. After 10 years, the nameless bone fragments had their identity restored, closing the largest question in the file. However, experts continued detailed skeletal analysis to determine cause of death. The largest skull fragment, labeled E2, underwent micro-X-ray and 3D CT scanning. Results revealed a depressed circular fracture, 6.2 centimeters in diameter, on the right occipital region, with radiating fracture lines in a fan pattern and clean break edges, indicating high force impact from a hard object with a small surface area, consistent with a metal pipe or heavy wooden club. The inner table of the skull showed crescent-shaped hematoma without healing, meaning the injury occurred while the victim was alive. Preliminary conclusion: cause of death, blunt force trauma to skull. Carbon-14 isotope testing was also performed to establish relative time of death. The C12 to C13 ratio in the bone tissue aligned with late 2010 to early 2011, exactly matching Daniel Kellar's disappearance date. No evidence of prolonged post-mortem movement indicated burial occurred shortly after death. The comprehensive Quantico report transmitted to Jackson contained 3 primary findings. 1 mitochondrial DNA positively identified the victim as Daniel Kellar. 2 time of death fell within late 2010. 3 cause of death was severe cranial trauma from direct external force. Rogers read every line in a small MBI conference room alongside FBI and state prosecutor representatives. He underlined blunt force trauma and consistent with garage impact evidence, then passed the document to the prosecutor. FBI experts added that the fracture pattern and injury morphology matched the impact vector seen in garage footage. AV. A close-range attack. The report formed a complete evidentiary chain-linking video, scene DNA, and forensic results. Rogers added his own comment to the summary sent to the investigation director. Biological evidence confirms victim killed between November 15, 2010. Cranial injury pattern matches imaging data and blood evidence found in garage. No environmental decomposition indicating delayed burial. He closed the file and leaned back, feeling a 10-year silence gradually ending. Outside the Jackson window, light rain fell, droplets tapping steadily on the glass like the ticking of a clock, confirming that at last Daniel Kellar had been identified. No longer a name on an endless missing persons list, but the victim of a meticulously concealed homicide, now properly named. Once the Quantico DNA and cause of death results were confirmed, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation and FBI Jackson Field Office entered the digital crime scene reconstruction phase to correlate all physical, video, and testimonial evidence. Lieutenant Caleb Rogers chaired the joint team of forensic specialists, geometric simulation engineers, and audio analysts. Input data included the old Oxford garage blueprints, 2020 luminol photographs, the garage footage.av file, skull forensic report, and 3D CT bone scans. All data were loaded into the Scene Rebuild 5.1 platform, capable of centimeter-accurate 3D reconstruction. On screen, the garage appeared fully rendered, 4.2 gutters, 6.5 meters, gray-painted wood walls, north side metal door, single overhead light illuminating the center. When lighting data were synced, shadows matched the original video exactly. The system then overlaid the luminol blood spatter trajectory as a glowing horizontal band on the left wall, 1.35 meters above the floor, precisely head height for a standing adult. Rogers instructed technicians to insert a digital mannequin scaled to Daniel Kellar's dimensions in the position derived from forensic data. The mannequin's head aligned perfectly with the luminol reaction zone. The ballistics physicist entered a 30-degree downward right impact vector using a 60 centimeters object, consistent with a steel pipe or heavy club. Simulation showed that 450-500 N of force was sufficient to produce the observed skull depression. Calculated blood spatter arc and fall distance showed the victim propelled backward 0.8 meters before collapsing face down, with the head striking the concrete floor. Reconstructed impact audio matched the two strong pulses recorded in the video, confirming intentional assault rather than accidental fall. Motion analysis of the female figure showed the distance between the two closing rapidly in 0.4 seconds immediately before impact, consistent with a close-range attack. The simulation demonstrated no defensive posture from the victim. Arms hung relaxed, torso turned toward the attacker, ruling out self-defense or accident. Full sequence playback revealed the entire event lasted under 7 seconds. Brief exchange, single heavy blow, body collapse, attacker movement toward the door, light extinguished. Rogers watched the reconstruction multiple times. Though cold and clinical, the 3D model was mercilessly accurate. Trajectory, blood spray, fall position. Everything matched collected evidence and forensic findings. He had the audio layer added. The system displayed 2 impact waveforms in phase, with the digital body being dragged approximately 0.9 meters, matching the secondary blood smear near the garage rear door. Rogers stood silently, recognizing that the reconstruction nearly perfectly reproduced the events of the night of November 15, 2010. When the model paused, the forensic examiner read the conclusion: impact direction right to left, 30-degree angle, force equivalent to a rigid one, 1.5 kilograms object, action deliberate, inconsistent with accident or self-defense. The simulation report was printed in 3 copies, over 60 pages, including trajectory graphics, force charts, and phase-by-phase screenshots. The summary stated clearly, based on scene, physical evidence, and video, high probability victim died from intentional lethal assault inside the Holloway garage, not accident. Rogers signed beneath the certification line. Simulation matches 96% of physical and forensic data. The 3D build was archived as court evidence under code SRB 2010R. When everything was finished, Rogers shut down the system. The room lights reflected off the dark screen, where his shadow overlapped the now closed garage image. After 10 years of pursuit, every hypothesis had become a clear picture. Daniel Kellar did not vanish. He was killed with one precise blow in a confined space where every trace had once been painted over, now reconstructed in merciless detail. With the 3D simulation complete and fully aligned with all forensic data, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers conducted the final case synthesis. In a secure MBI Jackson conference room, he spread every document into categorized piles: biological, garage blood DNA, excavated bone, trunk hairs, all absolute matches to Daniel Kellar's profile; digital, Danny_2010 folder, garage footage; AVI, Jackson IP bank logins; financial, $3.8 million, transfer diagram through the fake Kellar Foundation, proving monetary motive; and physical scene, luminol patterns, impact marks, reconstructed attack trajectory. Each category was linked by red arrows on a wall masterboard, beginning at the Holloway garage and ending at the Jackson storage unit. The 178-page final report opened with the forensic conclusion: Daniel Kellar's death was the direct result of severe cranial blunt force trauma inflicted inside the Holloway garage on the evening of November 15, 2010. The injury is inconsistent with accident and resulted from intentional assault. Subsequent sections presented synchronized video-audio analysis, 2 impact pulses, matching the physics of a 60 centimeters rigid object strike, plus the characteristic weak cry of pain reflex. The final moments of video showed the attacker moving to the door and lights extinguishing, coinciding with both individuals' cell phones going dark. The financial section solidified motive: post-disappearance transactions, fake foundation in the victim's name, forged electronic signatures, and IP addresses traced to the Holloway residence. Bank forensics confirmed every transfer originated from Margaret Holloway or someone with system access, with David Holloway receiving indirect benefit via consulting fees. From all physical, forensic, and digital evidence, Rogers constructed an interactive event timeline: 1 financial dispute in garage, 2 victims struck with hard object and killed on site, 3 body moved and buried behind house, 4 victims' assets used to launder money, 5 physical and digital evidence, concealed via paint and encrypted drives. Independent FBI review confirmed internal consistency with no contradictions. The consolidated report was presented at an early August 2020 meeting of MBI, FBI, and the Mississippi State Prosecutor's Office. As Rogers delivered the conclusion, his voice was steady. Based on forensic DNA, financial, digital, and scene reconstruction evidence, this constitutes intentional deprivation of life and concealment of remains for financial gain. Lead State Prosecutor Rachel McMillan read aloud from the report, "The conduct satisfies the elements of first-degree murder under the Mississippi Criminal Code, along with accessory charges of tampering with evidence and fraudulent concealment." The panel unanimously approved prosecution recommendation, listing principal perpetrator of the fatal act and accomplice in concealment and financial laundering. Meeting minutes recorded, physical, biological, and financial evidence collectively sufficient for criminal indictment. Request Lafayette County Court issue emergency arrest warrants and forward file to state grand jury. As participants left, Rogers remained, staring at the master board, from fabric fibers and blood beneath paint to $3.8 million, every detail now interlocked without gap, like a flawless equation. He signed the final page of the report in bold italic: Recommendation: Indictment for murder and concealment of human remains. After 10 years, the truth of that autumn night in 2010 had finally been restored in the coldest language available: forensic science and evidence. Immediately after the comprehensive forensic report was approved, and the investigative panel unanimously recommended prosecution, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation promptly finalized the application for an arrest warrant for David Holloway, the individual identified as having a direct role in assisting with concealing the body, forging financial documents, and obstructing the investigation. On the morning of August 6, 2020, the Mississippi State Prosecutor's Office submitted the petition to the Lafayette County Court, accompanied by the complete body of evidence, DNA results, crime scene video, banking data, and David's own recorded statements. Judge William Craig reviewed the file for 3 hours and signed the emergency arrest warrant at 11:15 a.m., specifying the charges of obstruction of justice, financial fraud, and accessory after the fact to murder. At the same time, Prosecutor Rachel McMillan held an internal press briefing, announcing that the Daniel Kellar case had officially shifted from a missing person investigation to a homicide and criminal concealment probe, stating that all related witnesses and suspects will be summoned in accordance with the law. Lieutenant Caleb Rogers led the joint task force with Jackson Police to execute the warrant at David Holloway's residence in Northview Terrace, Jackson. When the team arrived, he offered no resistance. He silently allowed them to handcuff him, read him his Miranda rights, and seize his phone, laptop, and remaining financial documents. The entire process was recorded on body cam, while MBI simultaneously sealed the property and froze 2 bank accounts in David's name for further investigation. In the summary forwarded to the prosecutor, Rogers wrote clearly, "The suspect is being charged as an accessory after the fact, participating in concealing evidence, laundering the victim's assets, and deliberately providing false information during the investigation." On the same day, the case details were officially released. The mastermind and person directly responsible for Daniel Kellar's death was identified as Margaret Holloway, who had died in 2017 in Jackson of heart disease. Based on forensic results, video footage, and scene reconstruction, investigators concluded she was the only person present with the victim in the garage at the moment of the fatal impact. Although she was deceased, the file remained classified as closed subject deceased to preserve judicial integrity. However, because David Holloway's subsequent actions, helping move and bury the body, and participating in forging signatures to transfer more than $3.8 million from her estate, occurred after the fact, he remained criminally liable for his part. At the end-of-day briefing, Prosecutor McMillan publicly read the decision. An arrest warrant has been issued for David Holloway on charges of obstruction of justice, financial fraud, and concealment of a crime. The direct perpetrator was Margaret Holloway, deceased, but the continuing consequential acts will be fully prosecuted. Rogers sat quietly at the back of the room, the yellow light falling on case file hash 2010-447, now twice as thick as when he first received it. 10 years earlier, the cover had read "Open Pending Leads," now it bore a red stamp, "Criminal Indictment Issued." He signed off on completing the investigative phase, feeling not triumph but the heavy weight of a belated ending. Outside, the Jackson afternoon drifted slowly by. A short siren wail signaled that a case had closed most of its shadows. The one who struck the blow was no longer alive, but those who helped her hide the truth still had to face justice. The trial of David Holloway opened at the Lafayette County Courthouse in Oxford on the morning of November 3, 2021, nearly 11 years after the night Daniel Kellar vanished. From early morning, dozens of reporters and local residents had gathered outside. Many who once knew Kellar from North Delta Funeral Home brought flowers to place on the courthouse steps. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. People almost held their breath as Judge William Craig, the same judge who had signed the emergency arrest warrant, took the bench. The prosecution was led by Rachel McMillan, joined by representatives from the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation and the FBI. The defendant, David Holloway, wore a dark suit and prematurely gray hair, sitting beside defense attorney Martin DeWitt. The trial lasted 12 days and featured more than 30 witnesses, including Lieutenant Caleb Rogers, the lead investigator, and forensic experts from Quantico. On the second day, the prosecution presented its opening chain of evidence with a 3D printed garage reconstruction model and a digital simulation projection. The courtroom lights dimmed. The old garage appeared on screen, luminol glowing blue, the impact trajectory, and the victim's fall position. The forensic expert's voice was steady. A powerful blow from the right at a 30-degree angle, sufficient to fracture the skull. This could not have been an accident. Next, the video garage footage. AV played, grainy images but clear audio. Conversation, something falling, then two heavy thuds that silenced the courtroom. Some spectators lowered their heads, a few left their seats. After the video, the prosecution introduced the DNA report confirming that blood, hair, and bone samples all matched Daniel Kellar's biological profile. Rogers took the stand and recounted in detail, tracing every clue from fabric fibers in the garage, the wooden chest in the Jackson house, to excavating the burial site containing human bone fragments. McMillan asked, "Lieutenant, what makes you certain this went beyond mere concealment into collusion?" Rogers replied, "The money. Every financial transaction began after Kellar disappeared. David Holloway was the only remaining person with access and who benefited." The prosecution then displayed bank statements and a diagram tracing the $3.8 million transferred through the fake Kellar Foundation, along with IP logs from the computer Margaret Holloway used that David had set up. Red arrows on the electronic diagram looked like cold veins of blood. In the defense phase, Attorney DeWitt argued that his client only followed instructions from his legal guardian and had no knowledge that Margaret Holloway was involved in any violence. He contended that, since excavation did not recover a complete skeleton, the exact time of death or original body location could not be definitively established, implying the case might simply be an accident concealed out of fear of scandal. The prosecution countered forcefully. There may be no complete body, but there is DNA, blood, video, money trails, and the defendant's own admission that he helped bury something heavy. That evidence is more than sufficient to prove conscious criminal concealment. On day 8, the FBI presented a second decoded segment from the hard drive video, transfernotes.av, showing a hand holding documents and a male voice whispering, "The money's safe now." Voice analysis results showed a 94% match to David Holloway. The courtroom fell deathly silent. The defendant lowered his head and showed no reaction. When asked about the recording, he only said, "I don't remember." On the final day, the jury heard closing arguments. McMillan stood at the lectern, her voice clear. This man did not swing the object that killed Daniel Kellar, but he did hold the shovel that buried him, and the pen that signed away a dead man's inheritance. Justice cannot stop with Margaret Holloway's death. It must continue with those who helped her. DeWitt spoke briefly. "No one can prove my client acted with intent. He was merely drawn in." The jury deliberated for more than 4 hours. At 6 p.m., they returned. The clerk read, "We, the jury, find the defendant David Holloway guilty of obstruction of justice, financial fraud, and accessory after the fact to murder." Judge Craig sentenced him. The defendant is sentenced to a total of 35 years imprisonment, with no parole eligibility for the first 20 years. In the courtroom there was no applause, only the faint sound of the clerk's pen. Rogers sat in the back, watching the last light of day fall through the old windows onto the condemned man's expressionless face. An 11-year case, involving so many people and so many mistakes, finally closed in absolute silence, broken only by the long tolling of the courthouse bell, as if reminding everyone that justice, however late, always finds a way to speak. After the trial concluded and the sentence became legally final, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation completed the comprehensive investigative report for case hash 2010-447. Daniel Kellar, marking the end of an 11-year journey from the initial missing person report to a criminal conviction. Lieutenant Caleb Rogers, who had led the reinvestigation phase, was tasked with compiling the final report for submission to the MBI director and the State Department of Justice. The report exceeded 300 pages and opened with the line, "Timeline of Investigation, 2010-2021, summarizing every development from Daniel Kellar's reported disappearance in Oxford, the failed initial searches, the transfer of the file to MBI, and its reactivation under the Digital Cold Case Reprocessing Program." Each phase was listed in detail: 1 initial scene investigation, 2 cold case archiving, 3 2020 re-examination of physical evidence, 4 digital data recovery, 5 excavation and DNA identification, 6 3D modeling and forensic analysis, 7 prosecution and trial. In the methodology section, Rogers specified 7 key forensic techniques used throughout. First, touch DNA extraction, isolating contact DNA from garage fabric fibers, yielding the victim's first biological trace. Second, luminol blood detection, revealing fluorescent reactions beneath layers of paint. Third, mitochondrial DNA sequencing, matching samples via maternal relatives. Fourth, carbon-14 isotope dating, establishing time of death. Fifth, digital forensics and Cellbrite recovery, retrieving the draft text. He said, "I can't leave. I'm scared of him," from Holloway's old phone. Sixth, 3D scene reconstruction and motion physics simulation, modeling the blow and the victim's fall trajectory. And finally, financial forensics and IP tracking, tracing the $3.8 million from the Holloway Foundation to the fake Kellar Foundation. Each technique was described with process, performing agency, statistical margin of error, and impact on the final conclusion. The report acknowledged 14 federal and local agencies involved, from the Jackson Crime Lab and FBI Quantico to the National Forensic Institute. The analysis summary stated, "Modern forensic techniques combined with financial and digital data restored a chain of events interrupted for a decade, proving death by violence and organized concealment." Rogers added a personal note. "The Kellar case demonstrates the value of preserving evidence. A single fiber can reconstruct an entire structure of truth." The concluding section listed 227 reanalyzed items of evidence, 23 sent to the FBI, 14 retained at MBI, and 8 used in court. A dedicated chapter on operational impact described how the case set precedent for cold case reinvestigation at the state level and helped establish new standard protocols. At the very end, in bold, "Case status solved. Cold case closed. File hash 2010-447 was officially moved from unresolved missing person to solved homicide case and archived in the Jackson Central Data Repository. A small ceremony was held in the storage room to sign the closure minutes. Rogers was the last to sign under investigator of record. As he closed the thick folder, he noticed 3 red stamps overlapping on the brown cover: missing, open pending leads, and solved. Outside, a sunny Mississippi afternoon poured light through the window onto the table where the report's final line was visible. After 11 years, truth reconstructed through evidence and time. In the corner, the metal storage cabinet shut with a dry, cold sound, ending a case that time seemed to have buried, now placed in its final position among the solved cold cases. 2021. On December 10, 2021, exactly 1 month after David Holloway's sentence became final, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation completed all administrative procedures related to the Daniel Kellar case. Closure minute number 447/21 was signed by the State Director of Investigation, confirming the file was officially closed and marking the end of one of the longest cold case investigations in agency history. The handover took place quietly in the central Jackson evidence vault, where rows of metal shelves stood in perfect order, each compartment labeled and sealed. Lieutenant Caleb Rogers and 2 archivists performed the final inventory: 4 evidence boxes containing biological samples, financial records, digital devices, and investigative documents. Box 1 held forensic biological items: DNA vials, soil samples, bone fragments, hair, all triple sealed and labeled evidence sealed, do not open without warrant. Box 2 contained all digital data: hard drive DHD01, copies of the Danny_2010 folder, and video storage disks coded SRB 2010R. Box 3 held financial records, bank statements, contracts, transfer documents. The 4th contained legal paperwork, trial transcripts, the judgment, and Rogers' 300-page comprehensive report. Everything was placed in Vault 4, Row B, second shelf from the bottom. The technician rechecked temperature and humidity controls, then affixed the permanent label, "Closed, case solved." When the process was complete, the archivist tapped the cabinet door lightly. The steel door closed with a dry, cold clang, and the lock clicked once more. Rogers stood silently for a few seconds in front of the silver-gray cabinet, feeling the emptiness mixed with the heaviness of an ending that was procedurally correct but held no victory. 11 years, thousands of hours, more than 100 reports, finally reduced to a few boxes and 4 lines on a seal. He signed the handover form, noting the completion time 1742. The administrative text was brief: case #2010-447, Daniel Kellar, status, closed. All evidence retained at MBI Jackson Evidence Vault. An electronic copy was uploaded to the National Judicial Archive, where solved cases become just another data string among thousands. When the procedure ended, Rogers walked into the hallway. Outside, Jackson was fading into dusk. Sunset light stretched long through the windows, casting dark red streaks on the floor like ink. He paused at the memorial wall, engraved with solved cold cases, and lightly touched the newly carved line: #2010-447, Daniel Kellar. Solved, 2021. Each case was part of this place's memory, and for him the Kellar case was not just a closed file, but proof of the value of persistence in investigation and of forensic science overcoming the limits of time. He closed his notebook, looked at the plaque one last time, and walked away. Behind him, the vault door gradually darkened. Hallway lights reflected on the freshly affixed red seal: closed, case solved. Do not reopen without order of court. The Daniel Kellar case, which began as a short missing person report in 2010, had now become a complete file in MBI history. A story closed not with doubt, but with evidence, not with words, but with truth. 3 days after file, #2010-447 was officially closed. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation held a press conference at its Jackson headquarters to announce the resolution of the Daniel Kellar case, a cold case spanning more than a decade that had just been solved. The press room had been prepared since early morning. Dozens of local and national reporters crowded in front of the podium, bearing the raised MBI logo on a blue background. At 10 a.m., State Director of Investigation Linda Carver stepped to the microphone, backed by large lettering, "Cold Case Resolved. The Kellar Investigation." She began calmly but firmly. Today, Mississippi officially closes a case once considered unsolvable. Thanks to the combination of modern forensic technology and the determination of our investigators, justice has finally been served. Beside her in the front row sat Lieutenant Caleb Rogers, the thick case file in front of him, hands clasped tightly as if hiding emotion. Director Carver briefly summarized the timeline. Daniel Kellar reported missing in Oxford in 2010, the file shelved as a cold case for nearly a decade, then reactivated in 2020 under the Digital Cold Case Reprocessing Project. Behind her, a screen displayed the timeline with images: the gray fabric fiber, the blurry garage video, FBI Quantico DNA results, and finally, the November 2021 conviction. Her voice carried evenly. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, was carefully preserved for 10 years, and it was those pieces that led us back to the truth. After the director spoke, Rogers was invited to the podium. He spoke briefly, voice low and hoarse. Forensic science doesn't replace people, but it lets us hear the voices of those who can no longer speak. The Kellar case proves that every trace has a voice if we are patient enough to listen. He listed the 7 advanced forensic techniques used, emphasizing touch DNA and 3D modeling, considered the keys to breaking the case. When the slide showed the garage simulation and the blow trajectory, the entire room fell silent. A reporter asked, "Does MBI plan to apply this model to other cases?" Director Carver replied, "We have already established a dedicated digital forensics unit and will expand the cold case project statewide in 2022. The Kellar case is not just the end of one file, it is the beginning of a new method." Questions followed about FBI collaboration and the role of financial forensics in proving motive. When asked about the victims' families' reaction, Rogers answered softly, "They waited 10 years for answers. Today, they only need peace." The press conference lasted nearly an hour and a half and was broadcast live on state channels and nationwide. That same afternoon, major newspapers ran headlines such as "DNA Technology and Digital Data Crack, 2010 Oxford Case." The Associated Press called it one of the decade's landmark cold case resolutions, while Forensic Science Today devoted a full analysis to the integration of touch DNA and 3D scene reconstruction. The Mississippi community responded strongly. Many families of missing persons sent letters to MBI, hoping their cases would be re-examined using the new methods. In Jackson, the Department of Justice's electronic billboard displayed white text on black, "Justice Never Forgets." The Daniel Kellar case became a symbol of faith in justice and of forensic technology's power to transcend time. As the conference ended, Rogers walked into the lobby. Noon sunlight reflected off the newly mounted brass plaque in the hallway that read, "Case hash 2010-447, solved through evidence and time." He paused for a few seconds, then quietly walked away through the rushing reporters, leaving behind the sound of camera shutters and a story Mississippi would continue to tell for years to come. A cold case thought to be asleep forever, awakened by science and belief. 1 week after the press conference announcing the investigation results, Lieutenant Caleb Rogers returned to the MBI office in Jackson to finalize the closing report. The official conclusion of the case coded Kellar case hash 2010-447. The small second-floor room, where he had worked for over a year, still carried the same smell of paper, stale coffee, and the steady hum of the ceiling fan spinning overhead. On the desk lay the thick case file, sequentially numbered from initial investigation to trial and closure. Rogers opened each section, reviewed the entire timeline, double-checked signatures and confirmations, ensuring no errors remained before submitting the final summary to the cold case archive system. In the report, he wrote a brief opening. This report concludes an 11-year investigation into the disappearance and death of Daniel Kellar, funeral home director in Oxford, Mississippi. All fundamental elements of the case, the victim, the perpetrator, the time, the motive, and the method of concealment, have been established through forensic evidence and digital data. He then summarized each element in turn. The victim was Daniel Kellar, born 1974, who disappeared on the evening of November 15, 2010, at the home of Margaret Holloway in Oxford. The primary perpetrator was Margaret Holloway, a 78-year-old widow who struck the victim with a blunt object in the garage, causing fatal skull trauma. The accomplice was David Holloway, her adopted grandson, who assisted in moving and burying the body and carried out financial fraud to conceal the crime. Time of death was determined to be between 2138 and 2146, matching the timestamp on video recovered from an internal security camera. The primary motive was identified as financial disputes and an attempt to seize control of the Holloway Foundation's assets. In the conclusion, Rogers emphasized that the entire reinvestigation, restarted in 2020, was made possible by advances in forensic technology, touch DNA analysis, hard drive data recovery, 3D reconstruction, and carbon isotope analysis, all of which connected the scattered fragments into a complete picture of the crime. He added a personal note: technology can establish truth, but it is human patience and consistency that keep that truth alive. After the summary, he listed 22 key pieces of physical evidence, 7 forensic techniques, 14 cooperating agencies, and 31 supporting reports. Every item was coded and backed up in parallel to MBI's digital system. 2 hard copies were printed, one archived in the main Jackson repository, the other transferred to the Mississippi Cold Case Archive at the State University for permanent storage. When the final page printed, the line "Report Status, Finalized, December 17, 2021, appeared, marking the completion of all procedural requirements. Rogers carefully signed under Investigator of Record, then penned the last line, "Case officially closed. Truth established through evidence, time, and persistence." He affixed a red evidence seal sticker to the cover, carried the entire file downstairs to the ground floor, where the secure transport van was waiting. The Jackson afternoon was cold. Wind whistled through the corridor with a faint metallic echo. As the warehouse clerk signed for receipt, Rogers watched the van pull away from the gate, carrying the final file of the Kellar case, the case that had borne his name for the past 2 years and was the culmination of a decade of relentless effort by people who refused to let the past stay buried. Back in his office, he shut down the computer, looked at the brass nameplate on his desk. Lot. Caleb Rogers, Cold Case Unit. In the glow of sunset streaming through the window, he wrote the final entry in his personal notebook. Daniel Kellar, missing 2010, located 2020, justice served 2021. 11 years, 1 man, 1 truth, 1 ending. Then he closed the notebook, placed it atop the sealed stack of files, and left the room, leaving behind the office lights gradually switching off, where the Kellar case was finally closed, no longer a mystery, but proof of the endurance of time and the eternal value of justice. The Daniel Kellar case, Mississippi 2010, is not just a criminal story. It is a profound reflection of the core values of American society today: justice, faith in truth, and the power of forensic technology in restoring the voices of those who have been silenced. In that story, a forgotten gray fiber in the garage, a dusty old hard drive, or a seemingly meaningless blurry video segment became the keys that unlocked the entire truth. It is proof that in a modern society, every piece of data, every detail, no matter how small, carries within it the potential for justice if people are persistent enough to uncover its meaning. In today's America, when public trust in the justice system and the media is sometimes shaken, the Kellar case reminds us that truth does not always arrive immediately, but it does not disappear. Investigators like Lieutenant Caleb Rogers, represent the image of a society that still believes science and professional ethics can together bring truth to light. From this story, the lesson for modern life is never dismiss the past, never underestimate details, and never believe that time can hide wrongdoing forever. In work, in communities, or in relationships, honesty and steadfastness remain the foundation that keeps every system running sustainably. In a country where data, technology, and ethics constantly intersect like the United States, the Kellar case reminds every individual that what matters is not the speed of finding the truth, but the fact that we never stop searching for it, whether it takes 10 years or a lifetime. Thank you for following the journey to solve the disappearance of Daniel Kellar, Mississippi 2010, where justice was found after more than a decade of silence. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring other unsolved cases together, where the truth is still waiting to be revealed in the next video.